Hey everyone, today I'm joined by Jakub Grajcar. Kuba is the content marketing manager at ZenPilot, and I wanted to bring him onto the show to shed some light on marketing for agencies. You have probably heard me mention the stat that only 14% of agency clients come from direct marketing. And it's for that reason you should be spending more time marketing your own brand. Kuba hosts the Agency Journey podcast. He writes ZenPilot's newsletter, and he produces just loads of content for social media. So there is a lot you can learn from him, and he over delivers in this conversation. In this episode, we discuss how marketing an agency is different than other businesses, how podcasts can benefit your brand, why agencies should start a newsletter, and more. Today's episode is brought to you by ZenPilot. There are lots of tools out there for agencies to manage projects, but any project issues aren't usually caused by the tool. They're from your own processes. ZenPilot helps agencies implement their project management tools while streamlining operations, so your team can move from chaos to clarity. You can see for yourself at zenpilot.com/forward. And now, Jakub Grajcar. It's easier than ever to start an agency, but it's only getting harder to stand out and keep it alive. Join me as we explore the strategies agencies are using today to secure a better tomorrow. This is Agency Forward. How is marketing an agency different than another business?
Okay, so my experience previous to working at ZenPilot, I was working at not exactly an agency, it was a software development consultancy. And was, Polish based. So a little bit of a different world there. That company got to like 300, 400, I think, headcount by the time I was leaving there. One difference that I see, it's more of a quirk, really. But what I noticed, and this is a point to the extent of, I think this industry is a little bit further marketing-wise than some others. But I'm noticing that there's a lot of thinking about having intellectual property when marketing an agency. It seems like every agency past a certain point of maturity has a framework or a model that they're communicating about to the market. That's one thing that I've noticed here, where it seems like, despite the fact that a lot of these boil down to marketing agencies, digital agencies, there still is a need to lay claim to something that they can call their own. I think this is a really smart move. And actually, I've been taking it back, when I talk with marketers in other industries, I say you should have a look at having some sort of model, something you can name, something you can claim, and then that intellectual property takes on a life of its own. I feel like that's one of the things that I've noticed.
Yeah. So I'm taking a course right now, and it's reminding me of a bunch of different frameworks and models and stuff that I've just been neglecting because there's so many out there, right? How can you keep in touch with everything? But one of them is the market sophistication model. And so, and I think this is actually playing into what you're saying, where if nobody at this point is going to a marketing agency saying what problem do you solve, right? They all know you're generally solving, you're going to help me get in front of more people so that I can get more customers and do this. So people are start asking well, why are you better? But now every agency is going to make these massive, bold claims, right? Like when you look back in the 90s and everybody was making these big fitness claims, well, we can help you lose 10 pounds in 10 minutes. And it was okay, really? And so it oversaturates, and then it becomes okay, well, what makes you different than everybody else? Yeah. And that's where you start building these other frameworks, and then what makes you best. And now it's okay, well, this framework works. We have 1,000 clients that we've ran through this, and it's gotten everything. I don't think we're yet at the final stage of what makes you iconic, where it's Apple, right? And all these things are going to completely revolutionize. I don't know if marketing agencies will ever get there. But I think that's where all those frameworks are coming. So yeah, I think you're spot on with the intellectual property being something that's necessary in order to stand out within this space.
Yeah. And that's interesting because what I'm also noticing, like you mentioned, the problem that you solve that I think is known to a large extent. I mean, you go to a marketing agency, maybe with superficial problems, and the agency helps you understand kind of the deeper rooted issues. But you've probably heard about those things coming in as well if you're a well-versed CMO or something like that, hiring an agency. What I've also noticed, and this is one of my key learnings from actually hosting the Agency Journey podcast. I've had, a couple dozen or maybe a little bit more than that of these interviews already as hosts since taking over from Gray. one thing that stands out and the watershed moment for agencies a lot of the time is we picked our niche. Not only what we do, although narrowing it down can be very important as well, but also who we do it for. And I feel like that's a big part of the marketing where we're just for we had Chris Dreyer on Agency Breakthrough, our sister podcast, and I think his niche, as I recall, is like personal injury lawyers.
Yeah,
just
we had him on the
specifically just
podcast
that.
too.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah.
So that is where this industry is also in my eyes, where it's like super specific and super narrow, and whoever hits that niche identifies it and takes the plunge, they seem to benefit in a big way.
Yeah. What was interesting about Chris's story too was that he set out to just do like personal injury and stuff, and then or private injury, whatever. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but set out to do that, and then they started like acquiring more things as they went on. And then when they went back and looked at it, they were like, "Well, our most profitable is what we initially set out to do. We got to get back to doing that."
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, even if you do said this right, you got to go back and like look at it every so often to make it happen. But yeah, that's an awesome insight. That like, why don't more agencies realize that? Right, like you're marketing an agency. How do you make sure that you guys are targeting the right people and that you're promoting the problem to those people so that you can actually make headway?
I feel like I'm a little bit spoiled in that regard. When I arrived here at ZenPilot, I feel like a lot of that thinking, a lot of that work was already done. I mean, not to undersell myself here, but for example, the 1-3-5 formula, the three keys that we solve, and the one goal that we try to lead clients towards, and the three keys being tools, projects, tools, processes, and habits. For those who don't know, as ZenPilot, we help with project management through these three keys. That was already in place, and the niche was already picked. Agencies, however, there's still more. I mean, when you look at content, there's still even you can go even narrower, and every piece of content is really a question of positioning. Is how I see it. And sometimes the positioning is, a strong lens could be the type of company you're trying to reach. Just recently, I recorded an episode with Gray, just talking about the specific challenges of a company, an agency that's around the 10 FTE mark. What are the specific challenges there? What can you anticipate happening past that mark, and how to prepare and how to handle these challenges, both operationally and in terms of what's going on in your mind as an owner. So that's like super niche. You're talking to one particular role at one particular type of company at a particular size. And I think this is where it's going to go in the future. Like these days, a lot of the content ideas that we're throwing around are specifically geared towards helping sales conversations. I had a conversation with a company in this type of situation, this type of niche, this type of size. Okay, we don't have something that specifically targets them. If conversations of that sort happen frequently enough, we just try to record a conversation specifically around that. And with podcasting, it's quite easy, right? I often compare podcasting to, like, I'm a musician too. So how there's, when you're doing music, the way songs come to be is often through jamming, right? So you might jam out for 30 minutes, and the song that comes out of it after much kind of refining can be 3 minutes. So podcast episodes, even the conversation we're having here, I compare these to like having a jam. You never know what's gonna come up, what's gonna stand out the most. And I think a lot of content operations right now are seeing that it's worth having these kind of loose conversations to see what comes up. And when they're highly targeted, you come up with interesting stuff.
I really like that metaphor. Podcasts or jam sessions, because it does make sense, right? You're going to uncover like that one idea just through conversation, and then it's like you can go now explore that, and it becomes blog posts and clips and everything else.
Let me tell you, it's really familiar looking at what's happening, during these conversations and what comes out the other side. The clips, the summaries, the blog posts, like coming from the music world, it's really similar.
Yeah. So I guess, how else are you using the podcast to kind of just market, I guess, your business?
I've been following the thinking in this world for a while. Like my first real connection with this world was back in 2020. The pandemic started, lockdown started, and at my previous company, we were thinking of we were basically looking at live streams. A lot of events moved online for obvious reasons, and we started a live stream series of our own. At the time, I happened upon James Carberry from Sweetfish Media. I had the pleasure of interviewing him last year, also for Agency Breakthrough. So at the time, he was promoting his book called Content-Based Networking, and that was my initial idea around podcasting, where it's a way of making connections. It's a way of getting a yes where usually you would get a no in terms of having a conversation. I mean, how else would you have landed a conversation with me if not for just kidding. We go way back. But that was the playbook, right? Come up with maybe an ABM list, find the stakeholders at those companies, send them a request, get them on the podcast, and then follow up on that. Have some follow up conversations, and you might have some business. So I see that as like the previous chapter of using a podcast. Now, though, and even James himself has now changed his tune, where it's more in the direction of co-hosted commentary is what he calls it, but there's a more specific, like the podcasts have a couple main characters. Sometimes there's an initial guest, sometimes there's a bit of a switcheroo, but it's more of a recurring voice commenting on various aspects of the industry. This is a change that we've also been making with Agency Journey. I took over from Gray as host, but what we've actually introduced is I do guest episodes now, interwoven with those, and we're looking for a 50-50 split in the future, kind of that kind of balance. For now, I also interview Gray a lot, and what this allows us to do is to highlight Gray's expertise a lot more, our expertise a lot more, our view on the world a lot more, and this is more effective for building trust because. And I feel like, depending on your needs, you might want to, these are tools in a toolbox, right? You might want to go more in one direction or the other. If you need to make better connections, if you want to fill your list of contacts, maybe an interview-based show makes more sense initially. But if you want to be building more trust, kind of, you've got, a good contacts list, you've got a good base of listeners, and now you want them to kind of warm up to you and try to, for example, go down a sales pipeline. I feel like having more of these in-house episodes, that's gonna be more beneficial. And again, it's a great engine for content too. I mean, from these jams, some songs, so to speak, will be made.
Yeah, it's something I've started exploring too. I had some time off because I was working with the Army, and so I fell behind in podcast recording. But I still doesn't stop the ideas from coming, right? So I just recorded a handful of solo casts and got those up, and those ones are almost more downloaded than some of my top episodes. And so it's like, okay, well, these are ideas that maybe people want to explore more. Maybe we should have more of those. But yeah, that's always been one of my thoughts with like B2B podcasts, right? Like if you're just interviewing guests and getting these people on, like it's one thing if you're only interviewing your customers, because then you can get all these case studies, success stories, right? All of these things that helps your business.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if you're just interviewing experts, it's like, where are you getting to insert some of your ideas that people want to go back to you to hear what you have to say?
Exactly.
So it's like, finding that balance, right, to be able to do it. On the podcast, you are probably the only, I wouldn't say non-agency found, like most podcasts with agencies, it's like the founder started it and stuff, like they're rolling the podcast and then they just hang on to it. Whereas Gray actually handed the reins to you, which is a pretty big shift to take like a host for a podcast and move it. How has that transition been, and how have you been kind of fitting into that role?
I mean, it's been awesome, to be honest. Like, I'll admit, back when I was joining ZenPilot, I mean, that was, and first of all, if anybody's curious, if anybody's running a podcast right now, let me tell you, there might be people considering joining your organization now that are going to join 3 years from now, and they're already listening to your podcast. Because that was my story. I was listening to Agency Journey already in 2021, I think, after my very first call with Gray, back when we met through our mutual connection via ClickUp. So, I was listening to it. And when I was joining ZenPilot, I already had it in the back of my mind, but that's just because I love to host stuff. I had it in the back of my mind. A conversation might come one day to take over the podcast. And it's been a great fit, to be honest, but there needs to be willingness on both sides, right? Mm-hmm. Gray said, that he saw benefit, of course, to making these connections himself, but then having somebody that he can delegate that to, that's been it. I feel like there's value there. And you mentioned, myself not being an agency owner myself again. Um, that's actually been interesting for me because I see, content creators. I see two types. Probably there's more, but right now I see two types of content creators. And there's teachers and there's reporters. And I see myself very much as the second type. To be a teacher, a bona fide teacher, you would need to have, in my view, hands-on experience, done something, lived through something, built something. And, that might be in the cards for me sometime in the future. But right now, I'm definitely not an agency owner. What I do have, though, is, and then kind of that library has been building and building and building, is I report on what I see in the industry. I ask questions that some people find smart and just listen, just very intently listen. This is how insights come, like the one about niching that I just mentioned. Some recurring themes, when you talk with people of that sort in that kind of role, in that kind of situation, long enough and often enough, then you can see kind of the trends. And being a little bit of an outsider, partially, at least, not being in that role, it's some things pop up that are missed by the agency owners themselves. So I feel like that's been really, really useful to be able to ask. Sometimes I ask, naive questions, but also asking those questions, kind of the simple questions, the blunt ones, that can uncover some of the most interesting insights. And with each conversation, it gets better and better, in my opinion.
Right. You're not taking anything for granted when you go into these conversations, and you get to have
exactly
like the beginner's mindset to like really pull everything in. Because and realistically, right, like just because you're like talking to an agency owner, one owner does not know all the same things as others. I mean, I have worked with a bunch of them at this point where it's like I'll say something and they're like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Whoa, hang on, we got to go back a couple steps." Like you're not tracking these numbers in your business. Okay, that's like 101, right? So let's take a step here. But so like we can't really assume that every agency owner has it, and so by you being able to go in and do that the way you do, I think is definitely valuable for the audience.
Yeah, that happens in our conversations too. We talk about we help with issues like profitability, utilization through the work that we do at ZenPilot, and sometimes we have an agency owner on a call. We mention utilization, and they stop us, basically asking, and it might be even like a 10 FTE agency, right? And they stop us asking, could you explain that one to me? You never know. It's like there's a whole pie of knowledge to acquire as an agency owner, and some people have certain slices of that pie, and other slices need to be still filled in. I don't know why I went in the direction of a pie metaphor, okay, but bear with me. It takes a while until you eat the whole pie and you have everything in your head.
Yeah. So I guess you mentioned themes that you get from guests. What are some of those themes that you've been hearing lately? Things that people should be paying attention to?
Let's see. So I already mentioned niching down as one of the watershed moments, and definitely kind of I call it picking your lane, which doesn't always have it sometimes have a pejorative meaning, but for me it's like the clearest visual in my mind. Another one, I had some conversations around some conversations were around what to do in a recession, or when the market is a little bit tougher, and I had various responses to that, but one that stuck with me is to lean closer into your existing relationships. Basically, the relationships that survive in a recession and keep bringing in value are the ones that are kind of closer and stronger. So, in times of abundance, you might have more kind of looser connections. But when the going gets tough, you have a more limited number of partners. Maybe you go back to your clients to try and sell them on additional work because they've, and again, being blunt, they've opened their wallet once.
Right. Momentum.
I mean, they already trust you. They know that you can bring value, but they're not always aware of what more you can do for them here. And shout out to some of this I can remember from the episode with Kurt Schmidt. That's a good listen. That one was partially about networking, but he also mentioned this whole, and he did it step by step. This whole frame of reaching out to your previous clients and getting more business out of them. So that was another trend that basically, and I suppose it's another kind of flavor of niching as well, focusing on less but better. Yeah. So if you were to really generalize it, that was another trend that I saw. for larger agencies, whenever I spoke with somebody who leads a larger agency, like 150 people, 250 people, I had some conversations like that as well. A lot of the focus was on leadership, that you should be really like your main focus should be on building your leaders because they trickle the culture and the standards and the accountability down into the rest of the organization. So if you're in that sort of position, that's where the focus should be. And these are just some examples, right?
Yeah.
Again, these threads pop up and the connections kind of come through various conversations. And it's really interesting to see which points get mentioned often and what this whole landscape is like.
Yeah. I think what I've noticed about the like recession proofing conversations,
Mm-hmm.
they more frequently come from people who are very well tied into the finances, not the people
Mm.
who are doing the other pieces of agency life. So I always find that interesting. It's like, well, maybe we should listen to the money guys, right? Because if they're
Yeah.
worried, like there's something. But yeah, the leadership piece hits because so I just had Dr. William Attaway on the show, and
Mm-hmm.
he's super smart guy. We go back now over a year of just like bouncing on episodes together for like different shows and events. And he's a leadership coach. But like we're just talking about like people kind of neglect just leadership skills because there's always something else that's more pressing, right? And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, I should
Yeah.
go fix my I don't know, my sales funnel. I should go do work on this marketing asset. And it's like at some point you stop being an individual contributor and you have to actually work through people. So like maybe start working on that skill now.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I can definitely see how that is like as agencies grow, like it's going to become more of a problem to not have those leadership skills.
And I have an idea as to why, actually. I think this comes down to immediate gratification.
Yeah.
If you increase conversion in a sales funnel or, fix issues on your website, you can kind of see the effect immediately. With leadership skills, it's a lot more fuzzy. It's a lot more slow. You might say something in a one-on-one today, positive or negative, that has an effect 3 months down the line. And of course,
Right.
there's ways. And back when I was hosting my previous show, I was interviewing C-level executives a lot. One of the key insights from them was to build feedback loops, right? So
Mhm.
particularly in a leadership position, you need to be sure that you're asking the question of how this particular conversation went, what your takeaway is, or like rate me as a leader. These 360 evaluations, for example, some organizations do that. So there's ways to surface that feedback faster and to make it more clear, but you need to do it deliberately. It doesn't just come to you as it might come through, statistics in your Google Analytics or your HubSpot or whatever, right? So I think that's
Mhm.
what puts some people off, but the work is definitely worth doing. And that was kind of the chorus from my previous show. It was mostly like CTOs, VPs of engineering. They kept saying, focus on your people and build feedback loops. That was the main thing there.
Yeah, that's a good. I'd heard the concept of hidden metrics before, where it's like
Mhm.
you have the stuff that's visible, right? Those are the things that we're kind of gravitating towards because it's like I can track
Yeah.
it, right? I can actually
Yeah.
measure this and do it. But then there's the hidden metrics. So like people will always take a job if there's more money versus like thinking through a lot of those other details of like, well, let's go through my family and I'll have more time for like this and that, right? They just like because you can't quantify that really.
Exactly.
And like leadership is definitely one of those things. So I think those feedback loops are a great way to add like a quantification strategy to it so that you
Mhm.
can do that. I think it's super smart.
Yeah.
I want to shift direction though. So clarity, the goal of seeking clarity in all you do. It's kind of it's like woven through everything that ZenPilot does,
Yeah.
which I think makes sense, right? It's very fitting. But how? So like it's within the kind of like the actions that your brand is taking and like how you guys interact with your clients and what you're teaching. How are you also weaving that through everything you're doing on the marketing side?
It's an interesting question. So I think one part of it is definitely that that is a big part of the messaging itself, right? And again, this is the benefit of having a clear framework you're sticking to and it's set in stone. That we always talk about the 1-3-5 formula. We always talk about the 3 keys. We always talk about clarity. It's kind of a guiding principle in the sense of it creates an ideal that we also try to imprint, so to speak, in the audience's mind, and this is kind of the top of the mountain that we want to lead them to. So basically it's like the goal or the promised land, so to speak, that you want to lead them to. In that sense, it really helps the marketing because, and we have it defined. This didn't happen overnight, right? But I think a lot of agencies could do that as well. Is to think about like what is the end state that you want to lead your client towards, and to be able to really visualize that, really have some enticing language to describe that. A tactic we've been using recently is we have this Miro board that contains just a bunch of our intellectual property on there, and a section of that Miro board is all about clarity, and we divide it by 5 roles. It's individual contributors, project managers, account managers, leadership, and clients. And then for each of those roles, we actually show what clarity looks like. And in our case, it's rather easy because what it boils down to is views within ClickUp. So for the individual contributor, here's the My Tasks view. Finally, clarity on what you need to do on a given day within your allotted 8 hours or however many of time. For account managers, you've got the client health view, et cetera, not to go through all of them in detail. And we show that on almost all of our streams and webinars just to show what is possible. That is what clarity does for us. And, in a sense, it's meta because this also kind of creates clarity around the end state, if you know what I mean, right? When you make it so concrete, when you really show, don't tell, so to speak, that principle that we try to adhere, that prompts some really good questions from the audience and some good reactions. Some of the of the questions that we love to get, of course, from a business standpoint is, I love this view. How can I get this view? Well, here's the product page for that. And, we can talk about how to make that happen, but it's a much easier conversation when you can just really tangibly show it, right? This might be a better fit for some agencies versus others, but I think all of the agencies listening to this might benefit from thinking more about this end state. And of course, contrary to that, we talk about leading agencies from chaos to clarity. I probably won't be the first person nor the last on this show to talk about having a strong brand villain, but that can really get people going, where you talk about also because, you've got this brand villain, but you also need to think about like the symptoms that this villain is actually ruining your life. So on a recent webinar, what I did, for example, as the very first slide, that was a tactic that really worked nicely. On the first slide, I showed like 12 particular things that might be happening at your agency. So for example, individual contributors don't know what they should be doing on a given day, or leadership doesn't know capacity, or you don't know your client health. It was numbered 1 to 12. And the first question I asked before everybody even joined the webinar, instead of the usual warm up type of question of like, what's your favorite type of sandwich? I've done it. It's fun. But this time I asked, since you're here early, you can steer the conversation and steer the content. Which of those 12 do you feel the most right now? Or, you can pick a few. And that really helped us, find the right language and to identify. And it also makes follow-up conversations easier, right? Because if they identify, I don't know the workload of my team, here's a dedicated video of that, the follow-up emails write themselves, so to speak.
Right.
So I hope that answers the question because I went a few places there.
No, that one, that's a super smart tactic too, because they very infrequently do your customers know what the problem actually is, what that core problem is, but they definitely know the symptoms because they show up every day and they feel those. So being able to hit them right from the start, my immediate thought is like, this person gets me, right? Like they're literally, he has a list of 12 things that I'm feeling right now in front of this. He obviously has a solution. Let me stick around and listen. Super powerful concept there.
Yeah. The mindset there is, content can be used to diagnose the prospect, so to speak. And once you've got a more clear diagnosis, then you can prescribe, better solutions. This can also help you filter people out who have a problem that you don't solve, right? But this, and I learned this from, that episode is not out yet, but it might be by the time this is out. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Jen Allen Knuth. She's running her own thing called Demand Gen, Jen, right now. Super awesome conversation. And what she taught me was this whole concept of a problem hypothesis. For every new contact, every new prospect, you've got, initially you don't necessarily know what their problem is. Maybe they signed up for a webinar on a particular topic, but you don't know their exact symptoms. And I think one of the key roles of content that's being neglected right now is not just to get attention and to retain that attention, get people kind of involved with your brand, but also try to gradually find out more and more about the people that are coming to your webinars, reading your content. Give them something to click on. Give them, three options to choose from, so you can have, richer data, and that makes outreach kind of follow up after the content. If you're doing any outbound or like farming your list, so to speak, it makes it much easier to make these conversations much more relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good, 'cause a lot of times you think about content as a way to like qualify and disqualify, but I think I
Mhm.
like the idea of diagnosing within that content as well, so that really
Yeah.
directs like their route. Um, so speaking of other content though, what are your thoughts around agencies having newsletters?
I think having an email list continues to be a smart play. I don't know what would have to happen for that not to be a smart play. Right now, email still works differently to almost all the other platforms. You get your email still sequentially. You get all of your emails in your inbox. I mean, it depends on how you have it set up. Gmail, for example, by default does some filtering. But if you
Mhm.
send somebody an email, there's a good chance they'll see it. This is very much not guaranteed when you're posting organically on social.
Mhm.
Notifications might fire off, might not fire off, even for people who are following you. They might hit the bell, and theoretically, they should always get the notification when they hit the bell on your profile, but it's a very specific action. So I think kind of being able to have more certainty around the fact that your audience is going to get your content, that is a very strong reason to have a newsletter. And I don't see, like, if I were spinning up a new marketing operation now, I don't see how. Okay, maybe, I mean, it depends heavily on on the context, right? But especially for B2B, especially for longer sales cycles, you want to keep them in. You want to keep them close, and email is a great way to do that. I wouldn't say kind of ubiquitously every agency should
Mhm.
have a newsletter, but I think every agency should consider one, and that's often going to be a yes.
I think we should have had one when I was running an agency. the
Mm,
we very rare like we had certain email sequences that would go out during certain events and stuff. Like if you took an action, here's a week's worth of emails around whatever topic.
yeah,
But then we'd really only hit people if we had something coming up that we wanted them to attend or purchase or do something. And
yeah,
it was like we didn't have that constant like being in your inbox, letting you see us. I think a
yeah.
newsletter really could have shifted that.
And
Um,
and let me just say, there's different various ways to approach it. But if you're really pressed for time, I think it's okay to start off with, a lot of maybe solopreneurs, solo founders right now are committed to posting on LinkedIn, for example, 4 times per week or something like
mhm,
that. So, whether you want to do a weekly newsletter or more frequently than that, just that post, if it stands on its own and it's not heavily dependent on like interaction or something, that can be your newsletter, or
mhm,
you've got a new podcast episode, that can be your newsletter too. Just something that gets you in that inbox. This is a lesson that was also difficult for me to learn, is that nobody pays as much attention to my channels as I do, and people need to be reminded. And if they see the same content on my LinkedIn and in my email, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to think, okay, I already saw this, I'm just going to read the next email. But the upside, on the flip side of that, so to speak, is if the algorithm for whatever reason abandons them and they don't get my latest post, they will get it via email. If they get
mhm.
to the LinkedIn version of that, they'll get kind of re-engaged with my account, and there's a good chance that they'll start getting organically these LinkedIn posts again. So this is another big advantage to having that.
Right. Yeah, and it's definitely. I mean, my newsletter, I'm averaging like probably 50 to 65% open rates, which like I
Hmm,
cannot say the same for like LinkedIn posts, right? Like some
exactly.
posts it gives me a ton of impressions, other times like it's not putting it in front of anyone and I don't know the rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
But I can see like, okay, are people like I get responses back, right? People will reply and say, "Hey, great topic, love this email." It's like, okay, I know that's something I need to explore further, like because I'm getting very direct feedback from a place where you're not necessarily going to get feedback. But even the clicking of links, it's like, okay, they're clicking on this thing. How did I set it up? Like, what is it about this that's exciting them? Let me go try that on LinkedIn now and see what it does. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think newsletters probably underappreciated. And it takes, I mean, I wrote one that goes out tomorrow. I wrote it in 15 minutes last night. just like I had a thought, I knew what I wanted to put down, and so I just started typing away, and it's like boom, like I got something, right? Like maybe
Exactly.
hopefully it's a good something. I guess the audience will let me know. Um, but what's interesting is like you don't even when people start reading them and they realize who you are, and like when you pop up in their inbox, I don't have like some crazy subject line for like, hey, pay attention to me. It's literally
Yeah.
dynamic agency OS newsletter, like issue 10, 20,
Hmm.
whatever. And like that's all they see for the subject line, and they're still clicking into it. And so it's like they know that I know they want the content, which is from my ego's perspective, awesome. Or at least 50% of them want it. The other 50%, I'm watching you. But
Yeah.
but yeah, that's positive. Um
Exactly.
so as we wind down here, I've got a couple questions for you. Well, first, where can people hear about the both of your podcasts more?
Okay, so
Go
the
ahead.
situation with the podcast is I referenced Agency Breakthrough a couple
Mhm.
times in this conversation. That was like a limited run series. But you'll find both this and Agency Journey, our main podcast, which I now host, and that has a lot more episodes. You'll find that currently on the ZenPilot YouTube channel, and you can also look up Agency Journey on your favorite podcast platforms, just not on Google Podcasts because that went away. I was a heavy
Yeah.
user.
Mm.
I'm still sore about it. I had all my
Mhm.
pods on there, but I heard that YouTube Music is going to handle that now, and
Yeah,
I
they're
hope it's going
shifting
to be
over.
good. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I ask because I follow Agency Journey and I listen to most of your episodes, but I hadn't heard of Agency Breakthrough. So I had to, I was like, should I know about this one? But if it was a limited series, then I'm okay.
yeah.
And like, oh, I didn't
Yeah,
know
that
that.
one is now concluded. Although it did have some of my favorite conversations, I have to say. We had Marcus Sheridan, we had James Carberry,
Yeah.
Tiffany Souther. That was one I ran solo because the idea behind that was like Gray and me were co-hosts. But anyway,
Yep.
right now the focus is very much on Agency Journey as
Yeah.
the main show, and we'll see
Awesome.
how it goes. I want to experiment with different formats, etc. Over there as well. So we'll see
Yep.
how it proceeds from there.
Which I was on Agency Journey, I think 2 years ago. When I shifted, we did the handoff of Kevin Barber and myself becoming CEO
Uh-huh.
of the agency, and so we did an episode on that with Gray, and it was a. I mean, I'm personally fond of it, but see,
What
maybe
I'm
some.
hearing is, yeah, it's been a while since you've been on Agency Journey, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It has been a while. Maybe we should connect
We should
after
talk
this.
about that. Okay.
But no, for any agency owners who are looking at handing over kind of the CEO role to someone else, there might be some insights you can pull from our conversation there. Um, okay, next one. What book do you
Mhm.
recommend every agency owner should read?
Huh. I mean, there's a book that that I have personal experience with that I would recommend, and then there's also, and again, I guess that's the kind of main thread line of the conversation. The two books that I hear that referenced the most often within agency journey conversations are Built to Sell, and I think the
Mm,
second one is Good to Great. So those are classics, and I will admit, from my perspective, haven't read either of those yet. But if you haven't, then those come highly recommended, and there's like crowd wisdom behind them.
mm,
Now, from my point of view, there's a few that I love. We were talking about leadership. For leadership, there's this one, and I think if you haven't heard about this one, then it's one that you might love. It's called Turn the Ship Around.
mhm.
I am not great at author names, but basically the author
Yeah,
was commander of a submarine,
yeah.
and
Admiral. I can't remember his name either.
exactly. I assume we'll put it in the
I
show
was in the
notes.
army, not the navy, so.
Okay, exactly. So I loved that one. It had, a storytelling element to it. It had a
Mhm.
particular character, so it was much more immersive, pun intended. Submarine immersive. Anyway, one framework that I took from that book was the leader framework and the phrase "I intend to." That one really stuck with me, both as a manager and as an individual contributor, which I basically
Mhm.
now am at ZenPilot. So the leader framework is basically you see your team members as leaders in their own area of
Mhm.
expertise, and as leaders they come to you not with questions or requests, but they come with plans, fully fledged plans, and that's what you should be calling them to do. So they should begin their conversations with you, and not everyone, right? But the main mode of thinking should be: I intend to do X about this problem. And what you do as a leader is you comment on the idea, you kind of critique their thinking. And in some cases, you'll just say, that is not the direction that I want. I would prefer a different direction. But the kind of the default is the team member has the plan, not you as the leader, but the team member has the plan for their particular area of responsibility. That was very powerful, and that stuck with me. So that's turned the ship around. And within the area of marketing, and I mean, that one is a classic, but I really like building a story brand. I referenced that knowledge in various ways. I mean, we talked about brand villains even today, right? So if you haven't read that one, then that's a great framework to have. It's a really good way to have just in one sheet that summarizes all of your marketing. And I just like storytelling as a discipline in general. So that one really resonated with me.
Awesome. Last question. Where can people learn more of you?
More of me. I'm on LinkedIn primarily. So Jakub Grajcar on LinkedIn. I am working on niching down myself in terms of my personal brand, but you'll find various types of advice on my profile. Some of it is going to be about agency operations, being a better agency owner. Through my work with ZenPilot, I share a lot about our content. When I'm writing more, within the vein of my own personal brand, then I share tips on marketing, tips on podcasting. I'm really and public speaking. I'm really passionate about that. Just today, I posted some tips on just how to run a good podcast interview. The stuff that I've learned over the years. I also like to talk about productivity in general and mindset. I love to know what goes through people's heads as they achieve great things, how they keep themselves motivated, keep themselves going, keep themselves disciplined. So, whenever I learn about something like that, I try to share it on my profile too. So you can find me there on LinkedIn. No email list yet, but if I have one, it'll definitely be plastered all over my LinkedIn profile too.
Awesome. All right, Kuba. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This is a great conversation.
That's the show, everyone. You can leave a rating and review, or you can do something that benefits you. Click the link in the show notes to subscribe to Agency Forward on Substack. You'll get weekly content, resources, and links from around the internet to help you drive your agency forward.